Harold Thornton stepped out of his shiny black car and looked at the address written on the small piece of paper in his hand. The 78-year-old man with silver hair and expensive clothes seemed out of place in this run-down neighborhood. He frowned, thinking he must have made a mistake. Harold was one of the richest men in Boston. He owned many big buildings in the city and had more money than he could ever spend. His large house had 12 rooms, but he lived there all alone. Every night, he ate dinner by himself at a long table meant for 20 people. It wasn't always this way. 20 years ago, Harold had a family. His daughter Catherine was the light of his life after his wife died. Harold had big plans for Catherine. He wanted her to marry a rich businessman and take over his company someday. But Catherine fell in love with a young musician named David who played guitar at small clubs. When she told her father she wanted to marry David, Harold became very angry. "He has nothing to offer you," he shouted during their last big fight. "He will never be able to give you the life you deserve." Catherine's eyes filled with tears that day. "Money isn't everything, Dad," she said quietly. "David loves me, and that's worth more than all your buildings." The next day, Catherine left with David. Harold was too proud to call her and say sorry. He thought she would come back when she realized how hard life without money would be. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Harold finally called her apartment, only to learn they had moved without leaving an address. Over the years, Harold tried to find Catherine. He hired people to look for her, but she had changed her last name and moved far away. The only message he ever received was a short letter telling him to stop looking for her. "We are happy without your money," she wrote. "Please respect our choice." As time passed, Harold became more successful but also more lonely. His big house felt empty. The money in his bank kept growing, but there was no one to share it with. Sometimes he looked at old pictures of Catherine as a little girl and wondered what had happened to her. Last week, Harold received a phone call that changed everything. A lawyer from a small town called with sad news. Catherine had died in a car accident 3 months ago. Harold sat in his chair for hours after hearing this, too shocked to even cry. His daughter was gone forever, and he had wasted 20 years that he could have spent with her. But the lawyer had more news. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "your daughter had a child. You have a 19-year-old granddaughter named Melissa." Harold couldn't believe what he was hearing. A granddaughter. Someone who shared his blood was out there in the world, and he had never met her. "Where is she?" Harold asked, his voice shaking. "I need to see her." The lawyer gave him an address in a small town 4 hours away. Harold didn't even wait until morning. He got in his car and started driving right away, his heart racing with hope and fear. Now, standing in front of what looked like the oldest, most broken-down trailer in the park, Harold checked the address again. This couldn't be right. No family of his could be living in such a place. But the numbers on the rusty mailbox matched what he had written down. Harold took a deep breath and walked toward the door, not knowing what he would find inside or if his granddaughter would even want to meet him. Harold sat in his big office on the top floor of the Thornton building. The walls were covered with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with important people. Through the large windows, he could see the city he had helped build with his real estate business. But today, Harold wasn't looking at the view. He stared at the phone on his desk, still trying to understand the call he had just received. "Mr. Thornton?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Wilson is here to see you." Harold pressed a button. "Send him in, please." James Wilson was Harold's lawyer and one of his oldest friends. They had known each other for over 40 years. James was the only person who knew how much Harold regretted losing his daughter. The door opened, and James walked in. He was carrying a brown folder. "Hello, Harold," James said, sitting down across from him. "You sounded upset on the phone. What's going on?" Harold ran a hand through his silver hair. "I got a call from a lawyer in Riverside, a small town about 4 hours from here." James nodded, waiting for him to continue. "He told me." Harold's voice became shaky. "He told me that Catherine died 3 months ago, a car accident." James's face showed real sadness. He knew how much Harold had missed his daughter over the years. "I'm so sorry, Harold. That's terrible news." Harold got up and walked to the window. 20 years, James. 20 years of silence between us. And now she's gone, and I can never tell her I'm sorry. His voice broke on the last words. James gave his friend a moment before asking, "Why did this lawyer call you now, after 3 months?" Harold turned back from the window. That's the thing. He said Catherine left behind a daughter. I have a granddaughter, James. Her name is Melissa, and she's 19 years old. James looked surprised. A granddaughter? Catherine never told you she had a child. Never, Harold said, sitting back down heavily. I missed everything. Her birth, her first steps, her first day of school. All of it. James opened the folder he had brought. What do you know about her? Almost nothing. Just her name and where she lives. Harold took a deep breath. The lawyer said she's alone now. No other family. James looked at his friend carefully. What are you thinking, Harold? I need to see her, Harold said without hesitation. I need to meet my granddaughter. James nodded slowly. Are you sure that's a good idea? She doesn't know you. She might not want to meet you. I have to try, Harold said. She's the only family I have left. James looked down at the papers in his folder. I did some quick research after your call. Catherine married David Jenkins, a local musician. They struggled financially most of their marriage. Harold felt a pain in his chest. He had been right about the money problems. What good had his rightness done? It only separated him from his daughter. The lawyer mentioned that Melissa is living in Catherine's home. Harold said. He gave me the address. James looked uncomfortable. Harold, from what I could find out, they were living in very modest circumstances. You mean they were poor? Harold said bluntly. James nodded. Yes. And now, with both parents gone, the girl is probably struggling even more. Harold stood up, suddenly determined. I'm going to see her. Today. Today? James looked surprised. Don't you want to think about this? Maybe call first? Harold shook his head. If I call, she might refuse to see me. I need to go in person. He began gathering his things. Cancel my meetings for the next few days, will you? James sighed but nodded. What are you going to say to her? Harold paused, his hand on his coat. I don't know, he admitted. But I have to try. I can't lose her too, without even trying. As Harold walked out of his office, he felt both scared and hopeful. For 20 years, he had lived with the pain of losing his daughter. Now, he had a chance to know his granddaughter. He wouldn't waste it. In his car, driving out of the city, Harold wondered what Melissa was like. Did she have Catherine's smile? Did she love music like her father? Would she slam the door in his face when she learned who he was? Whatever happened, Harold knew one thing for sure. He was done letting pride keep him from family. This time, he would do better. Harold woke up early the next morning in his hotel room. He had barely slept. His mind kept racing with thoughts about his granddaughter Melissa. What would she look like? Would she have Catherine's smile or her kind eyes? Would she hate him for what happened with her mother? After a quick breakfast, Harold got into his expensive car and checked the address one more time. The GPS said it would take 30 minutes to reach the trailer park. Harold felt strange driving his luxury car to such a place. He had never been to a trailer park before. As he drove through the small town, Harold noticed how different everything was from the big city. There were no tall buildings or fancy stores, just small shops, a diner, and people walking slowly down the streets. Some people turned to look at his expensive car as he passed by. Turn right in 500 feet, said the GPS voice. Harold followed the directions and found himself on a narrow road that led out of town. The houses became fewer, and the spaces between them grew larger. Soon, there were only trees on both sides of the road. Your destination is on the right, announced the GPS. Harold slowed down and saw a faded wooden sign that read Pine Valley Trailer Park. The sign was old and the paint was peeling off. Harold turned into the entrance, feeling more and more out of place. The road inside the trailer park was not paved. His car bumped up and down on the dirt path. Harold drove slowly, looking at the numbers on each trailer. Some looked better than others, but most were old and in need of repair. Children played outside, stopping to stare at the fancy car driving through their neighborhood. Harold checked the piece of paper with the address again. Number 42, he said to himself. He drove deeper into the trailer park, counting the numbers. Finally, he saw it. Trailer number 42 was at the far end of the park, partly hidden by some trees. It was smaller than many of the others and looked very old. The white paint had turned gray over the years, and one of the windows was covered with plastic instead of glass. A small wooden step led up to the door, which was painted blue a long time ago. Harold parked his car and sat there for a few minutes, gathering his courage. He looked at his hands and noticed they were shaking. After taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car. The air smelled different here, like pine trees and something cooking. Harold could hear a radio playing music from another trailer nearby. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. As he walked toward trailer number 42, Harold noticed small touches that showed someone cared about this place despite its poor condition. There were flower pots with bright red flowers by the steps. A wind chime made from colored glass hung by the door, making soft sounds in the breeze. Harold stopped at the bottom of the steps. Was this really where his granddaughter lived? How could Catherine have let her daughter stay in such a place? But then Harold remembered. This was his fault, too. If he hadn't been so stubborn, if he had accepted Catherine's choice, maybe things would have been different. With another deep breath, Harold climbed the 3 wooden steps to the door. The wood creaked under his weight. He stood in front of the blue door for what felt like a long time. Through the thin walls of the trailer, he could hear someone moving around inside. Finally, Harold raised his hand and knocked on the door. 3 gentle knocks. The sounds from inside stopped. Then he heard footsteps coming closer to the door. Harold's heart was beating so fast he thought it might jump out of his chest. The doorknob turned slowly, and the blue door opened just a little bit. A young woman's face appeared in the small opening, looking at him with suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. Harold looked at her face and felt his world stop. Those eyes, they were Catherine's eyes, looking back at him after 20 long years. "Melissa?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I'm Melissa. Who are you?" The young woman kept the door partly closed, one hand ready to shut it quickly if needed. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded t-shirt with jeans. Harold found it hard to speak. The words seemed stuck in his throat. "I'm Harold Thornton," he finally said. I am your grandfather." Melissa's eyes widened. She studied his face carefully, looking for something familiar. "My grandfather? Mom said her father was dead." The words hit Harold like a punch to his stomach. Catherine had told her daughter he was dead. That hurt more than he expected. "No, I'm very much alive," he said quietly. "May I come in? I would like to talk to you." Melissa hesitated. She looked at his expensive clothes and the fancy car parked outside. After a moment, she opened the door wider. "I guess so," she said. "But I don't have much time. My shift at the diner starts in 2 hours." Harold stepped into the trailer and immediately had to lower his head to avoid hitting the ceiling. The space was tiny, smaller than his bathroom at home. To his right was a small kitchen area with a mini fridge and a 2-burner stove. To his left was a couch with worn cushions and a blanket folded neatly on top. Straight ahead was a narrow hallway that probably led to a bedroom. What shocked Harold most was not the size but the condition of everything. Water stains marked the ceiling in several places. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling. In one corner, a plastic bucket caught drops of water from a leak in the roof. Despite these problems, the trailer was clean and organized. Books were stacked neatly on a small shelf. Colorful drawings were taped to the walls. A vase with wildflowers sat on the small table. "Please sit down," Melissa said, pointing to the couch. "Sorry, it's not very comfortable." Harold sat down carefully, feeling the springs through the thin cushion. Melissa remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest. "Would you like some water or tea?" she asked, remembering her manners. "No, thank you," Harold replied. "I just want to talk." Melissa nodded and sat on a folding chair across from him. "So, you're my grandfather, the one Mom never talked about." Harold looked at her face more carefully now. She had Catherine's eyes and chin, but her nose and mouth looked like her father's. She was beautiful in a simple, natural way. "Yes," Harold said. "Your mother and we had a disagreement many years ago about her choice to marry your father." "You didn't think he was good enough," Melissa said. "It wasn't a question." Harold looked down at his hands. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I was too focused on money and status. I missed out on knowing your father and on watching you grow up." A heavy silence filled the small space. Outside, they could hear children playing and a car driving past. "How did you find me?" Melissa finally asked. "A lawyer contacted me. He told me about your mother's accident." Harold's voice softened. I'm very sorry about Catherine. I wish I had made things right with her before. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. It was 3 months ago. The car slid on ice. She died instantly, they said. Harold wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he didn't know if he had the right. And you've been living here alone since then? Melissa nodded. Mom and I lived here for 5 years after Dad died. It's not much, but it's home. She looked around with a certain pride. I'm working at Joe's diner and saving up to go back to college someday. Harold noticed a photograph on the wall. It showed Catherine, smiling, with her arm around the younger Melissa. They were standing in front of the same trailer, but both looked happy. Were you and your mother happy? Harold asked, his voice breaking slightly. Melissa looked at him directly for the first time. We didn't have much money, if that's what you're asking. But yes, we were happy. Mom always said that love was more important than things. Harold felt tears forming in his eyes. Catherine had taught her daughter the lesson he had failed to learn all those years ago. The small space heater in the corner made a clicking sound as it struggled to warm the trailer. Harold noticed Melissa rubbing her hands together for warmth. Is that the only heat you have? He asked, looking at the tiny heater. Melissa nodded. The main heater broke last winter. This small one is all I can afford right now. I usually wear extra sweaters. She got up and took a kettle from the stove. I'm going to make some tea for myself. Are you sure you don't want any? Harold changed his mind. Actually, tea would be nice. While Melissa prepared the tea, Harold looked around more carefully. On a small shelf, he noticed several community college textbooks. Next to them were some awards with Melissa's name. You are in college? He asked. Melissa poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs. For a year and a half, I was studying to become a teacher. She handed him a mug with a faded flower pattern. I had a scholarship that covered most of it. Mom worked extra shifts to help with the rest. And after she died? Harold asked softly. Melissa sat down again, warming her hands on the mug. I couldn't do both, go to school and pay the bills, so I took a break. She said this simply, without self-pity. Harold felt a deep sadness. His granddaughter had given up her dreams while he sat in his mansion with more money than he could ever spend. Tell me about your mother, Harold said. What was her life like? Melissa took a sip of tea before answering. Mom worked hard. She had 2 jobs most of my life, at the diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. After Dad died from cancer when I was 14, things got harder. Cancer? Harold whispered. He hadn't known. Melissa nodded. It was quick. 3 months from diagnosis to... She didn't finish the sentence. The medical bills took all their savings. We had to sell our small house and move here. She looked around the trailer. Mom always made it nice, though. She said a home is made by the people in it, not by its size. Harold felt a pain in his chest. His daughter had struggled while he lived in luxury. Did she ever talk about me? He asked. Melissa looked down at her tea. Not much. Sometimes when she was very tired, she would mention that she missed her dad. But usually she just said you were gone. Harold put down his mug with shaking hands. I tried to find her, he said quietly, for the first few years, but she didn't want to be found. She was stubborn, Melissa said with a small smile. Like me. Harold noticed a drawing on the wall near the small table. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall woman, a shorter girl, and a man with a guitar. Your father was a musician, he asked, pointing to the drawing. Melissa's face brightened. Yes, he played guitar at local places. He taught me to play too. She stood up and went to the narrow hallway, returning with an old guitar. This was his. It's not worth much money, but it's my most valuable possession. Harold looked at the worn instrument. This was what had come between him and Catherine, his belief that a musician wasn't good enough for his daughter. Was he? Was he a good husband to Catherine? Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Melissa held the guitar carefully, running her fingers over the strings. He loved her very much. They were always laughing together, even when things were hard. He used to write songs for her. She paused. Mom told me once that she never regretted her choice, not for one day. Harold felt tears roll down his cheeks. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. I was wrong, he said. I was so wrong about everything. Melissa watched him quietly. After a moment she asked, Why did you come looking for me now? After all these years? Harold looked at her directly. Because I've spent 20 years being lonely and stubborn. When I heard about your mother, I realized I couldn't waste any more time. He took a deep breath. I don't expect you to welcome me into your life. I don't deserve that. But I wanted to see you at least once, to tell you how sorry I am. Melissa put the guitar down carefully. I have a photo of Mom when she was young, she said suddenly. Would you like to see it? Harold nodded, not trusting his voice. Melissa went to a small drawer and returned with a faded photograph. She handed it to Harold. It showed Catherine at about 16, smiling brightly at the camera. It was taken at their old summer house, a place filled with happy memories before everything went wrong. Harold held the photo carefully, as if it might break. She looks so happy here, he whispered. That's how I remember her too, Melissa said quietly. Happy. 2 weeks had passed since Harold first knocked on Melissa's trailer door. Today, he arrived carrying a small box of groceries. Nothing fancy, just some basics he had noticed were missing from her kitchen during his last visit. Just some eggs and bread, Harold said casually when Melissa opened the door. He had learned quickly that his granddaughter was proud and wouldn't accept anything that felt like charity. Melissa smiled and took the box. Thank you. Come in, I just made coffee. The trailer looked a bit different now. The leaking roof had been fixed, and new curtains hung in the windows. Harold had found a local handyman to repair the worst problems, presenting it to Melissa as a favor from a friend rather than something he had paid for. They sat at the small table, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. These moments had become precious to Harold. In his big mansion, coffee was served in expensive china by his housekeeper. Here, in this tiny trailer, the coffee tasted better somehow. I brought something to show you, Harold said, pulling out an old photo album from his bag. These are pictures of your mother when she was young. Melissa's eyes lit up. She moved her chair closer to Harold's as he opened the album. The first picture showed Catherine at about 5 years old, wearing a blue dress and missing her front teeth. Mom never showed me baby pictures, Melissa said, touching the photo gently. She didn't have many. Harold turned the pages slowly. This was her 10th birthday. We got her a bicycle. The photo showed a young Catherine sitting proudly on a shiny new bike. And this was at our summer house. Catherine loved to swim. Melissa studied each picture carefully. She looks happy, she said softly. She was, Harold replied, at least until I ruined everything. Melissa looked up at him. Over the past 2 weeks, she had heard his side of the story, how he had pushed Catherine away because of his own pride and fear. Mom wasn't perfect either, Melissa said. She was stubborn. She could have reached out too. Harold shook his head. I was the parent. It was my job to put her happiness first. He turned to another page in the album. Here she is at her high school graduation. She was so smart, just like you. Melissa smiled at the comparison. She always encouraged me to study hard. Said education was something no one could take away from you. Harold nodded. She was right. He hesitated before asking, have you thought any more about going back to college? Melissa sighed. All the time, but the reality is, I can't afford it. The scholarship I had won't be available again until next year, and even then, it's not guaranteed. Harold wanted to offer to pay for everything, tuition, books, a better place to live. But he had learned that pushing too hard would only push Melissa away. She had her mother's pride. One step at a time, he said instead. Maybe we could look at some options together. Melissa nodded slowly. I'd like that. Harold turned to another page in the album. It showed Catherine as a teenager, playing the piano. Your mother was musical too. She played piano for years. I didn't know that, Melissa said, surprised. She never told me. There's probably a lot you don't know about each other, Harold said gently. Just like there's a lot I don't know about you. Melissa seemed to consider this. Then she stood up and went to a small box on her shelf. She returned with a handful of photos. These are some pictures of Mom and Dad, she said, spreading them on the table. And me, growing up. Harold looked at the photos with wonder. There was Catherine, older but still beautiful, standing next to a man with kind eyes and a guitar. There was Melissa as a baby, then as a young girl. Family picnics, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments that Harold had missed. She looks happy here too, Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. Melissa nodded. She was. Dad made her laugh all the time. She pointed to another photo. This was their wedding day, small ceremony in a park. Harold studied the wedding photo. Catherine wore a simple white dress, not the fancy one he had always imagined for her. But her smile was brighter than he had ever seen it. Thank you for sharing these with me, Harold said. Melissa smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. That's what family does, right? Shares memories? For the first time since entering Melissa's life, Harold felt like maybe, just maybe, he might earn a place in her heart. Not because of his money or what he could give her, but because they were family. Yes, he said softly, that's exactly what family does. 6 months had passed since Harold first knocked on Melissa's trailer door. Today was moving day. Harold watched as Melissa placed her last box in the back of his car. Is that everything? He asked, looking at the small pile of belongings. Melissa nodded. Everything that matters. She looked back at the old trailer one last time. Despite its problems, it had been her home with her mother for 5 years. Leaving felt strange. Do you need a moment? Harold asked gently, noticing the look on her face. No, I'm ready, Melissa said, but she walked back to the wooden steps and sat down. Harold joined her, careful of the creaky wood. Mom and I used to sit here in the evenings, Melissa explained. She would play guitar, and we would watch the stars come out. Harold looked up at the open sky above the trailer park. You can see more stars here than in the city, he said. That's what Mom always said too. Melissa smiled at the memory. She said we were rich in stars. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Over the past months, the awkwardness between them had slowly disappeared. Harold had learned to listen more and judge less. Melissa had learned that not all help came with strings attached. I never thought I'd be going back to college, Melissa said, breaking the silence. When Mom died, I really believed that dream was over. Harold smiled. After many conversations and careful planning, he had helped Melissa apply for admission to her college program. He had also set up a trust fund to cover her education and living expenses, making it clear that this was not charity, but what Catherine would have wanted. Your mother would be so proud of you, Harold said. I think she would be proud of you too, Melissa replied. For changing. Harold nodded, humbled by her words. At 78, he had finally learned what truly mattered in life. His big house and expensive cars had never made him as happy as these simple moments with his granddaughter. Are you ready to see your new apartment? He asked. Melissa stood up. Yes, let's go. They drove into town, past the diner where Melissa had worked. She had given notice last week, and her coworkers had thrown her a small party. Harold smiled at the memory of sitting awkwardly among the young waitstaff, watching his granddaughter laugh with her friends. The apartment building was not fancy but clean and well-maintained. It was close to the community college where Melissa would restart her teaching program next month. Harold had chosen it carefully, nice enough to be safe and comfortable, but not so nice that Melissa would feel out of place. As they carried boxes up to the second floor, Harold's old knees protested. Melissa noticed his wincing. Take a break, Grandpa, she said, using the term naturally now. I can handle these small boxes. Harold sat down on a chair in the empty living room, watching Melissa organize her things. Grandpa still sounded wonderful to his ears. The first time she had called him that, about 3 months after they met, he had to hide his tears. The apartment was small but bright, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that actually worked properly. Melissa had insisted on keeping some of her mother's old furniture, mixing it with a few new pieces Harold had helped her choose. What do you think of the place? Harold asked as Melissa arranged books on a shelf. It's perfect, she said. Not too big, not too small. Harold smiled. He had offered to buy her a house, but Melissa had refused. One step at a time, she had said, echoing his own words from months earlier. On the wall, Melissa hung the photo of her parents on their wedding day. Next to it, she placed a newer picture, herself and Harold at a local park, both smiling at the camera. There, she said, stepping back to look at the photos. Family wall is complete. Harold's heart felt full as he looked at the pictures. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely old man with nothing but money. Now he had something priceless, a relationship with his granddaughter. Not complete, Harold said, standing up slowly. Just beginning. Melissa smiled and came to stand beside him, looking at their photo together. Just beginning, she agreed. Outside the window, the afternoon sun made the small apartment glow with warm light. A new chapter was starting for both of them, one that neither could have imagined just 6 months earlier. 6 months had passed since Harold first knocked on Melissa's trailer door. Today was moving day. Harold watched as Melissa placed her last box in the back of his car. "Is that everything?" he asked, looking at the small pile of belongings. Melissa nodded. "Everything that matters." She looked back at the old trailer one last time. Despite its problems, it had been her home with her mother for 5 years. Leaving felt strange. "Do you need a moment?" Harold asked gently, noticing the look on her face. "No, I'm ready," Melissa said, but she walked back to the wooden steps and sat down. Harold joined her, careful of the creaky wood. "Mom and I used to sit here in the evenings," Melissa explained. "She would play guitar, and we would watch the stars come out." Harold looked up at the open sky above the trailer park. "You can see more stars here than in the city," he said. "That's what Mom always said too." Melissa smiled at the memory. "She said we were rich in stars." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Over the past months, the awkwardness between them had slowly disappeared. Harold had learned to listen more and judge less. Melissa had learned that not all help came with strings attached. "I never thought I'd be going back to college," Melissa said, breaking the silence. "When Mom died, I really believed that dream was over." Harold smiled. After many conversations and careful planning, he had helped Melissa apply for readmission to her college program. He had also set up a trust fund to cover her education and living expenses, making it clear that this was not charity but what Catherine would have wanted. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Harold said. "I think she would be proud of you too," Melissa replied. "For changing." Harold nodded, humbled by her words. At 78, he had finally learned what truly mattered in life. His big house and expensive cars had never made him as happy as these simple moments with his granddaughter. "Are you ready to see your new apartment?" he asked. Melissa stood up. "Yes, let's go." They drove into town, past the diner where Melissa had worked. She had given notice last week, and her coworkers had thrown her a small party. Harold smiled at the memory of sitting awkwardly among the young waitstaff, watching his granddaughter laugh with her friends. The apartment building was not fancy but clean and well maintained. It was close to the community college where Melissa would restart her teaching program next month. Harold had chosen it carefully, nice enough to be safe and comfortable, but not so nice that Melissa would feel out of place. As they carried boxes up to the second floor, Harold's old knees protested. Melissa noticed his wincing. "Take a break, Grandpa," she said, using the term naturally now. "I can handle these small boxes." Harold sat down on a chair in the empty living room, watching Melissa organize her things. Grandpa still sounded wonderful to his ears. The first time she had called him that, about 3 months after they met, he had to hide his tears. The apartment was small but bright, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that actually worked properly. Melissa had insisted on keeping some of her mother's old furniture, mixing it with a few new pieces Harold had helped her choose. "What do you think of the place?" Harold asked as Melissa arranged books on a shelf. "It's perfect," she said. "Not too big, not too small." Harold smiled. He had offered to buy her a house, but Melissa had refused. "One step at a time," she had said, echoing his own words from months earlier. On the wall, Melissa hung the photo of her parents on their wedding day. Next to it, she placed a newer picture, herself and Harold at a local park, both smiling at the camera. "There," she said, stepping back to look at the photos. "Family wall is complete." Harold's heart felt full as he looked at the pictures. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely old man with nothing but money. Now he had something priceless, a relationship with his granddaughter. "Not complete," Harold said, standing up slowly. "Just beginning." Melissa smiled and came to stand beside him, looking at their photo together. "Just beginning," she agreed. Outside the window, the afternoon sun made the small apartment glow with warm light. A new chapter was starting for both of them, one that neither could have imagined just 6 months earlier.